At 17:30 hours, on May 5, 1945, Private First Class Desmond Doss crouched behind a shattered tree stump on the summit of the Maeda Escarpment on Okinawa, watching the last members of B Company 1st Battalion 307th Infantry Regiment climb down cargo nets thrown over the cliff face. The escarpment was a 400-foot-high limestone ridge that the Japanese had fortified with machine gun nests, mortar positions, and interconnected cave systems. American forces called it Hacksaw Ridge because assaulting it was like running into a meat grinder. B Company had taken the summit at 1300 hours after 4 hours of brutal close-quarters combat. They had held it for 3 hours before a Japanese counterattack drove them back. Now they were retreating down the cliff, leaving their wounded behind because carrying men down cargo nets under fire was impossible. Except Doss wasn't retreating. He was 26 years old, 145 pounds, a Seventh-day Adventist who refused to carry a weapon because his religion forbade killing. His unit had mocked him for 2 years, called him a coward, questioned whether he belonged in combat. His own company commander had tried to have him transferred out of the infantry. His platoon sergeant had told him he would get someone killed. Now Doss was alone on top of Hacksaw Ridge with approximately 75 wounded Americans scattered across 300 yards of open ground. Japanese soldiers were 50 yards away in cave entrances and spider holes. Mortar shells were landing every 30 seconds. Machine gun fire swept the ridge from 3 directions. Every other able-bodied soldier had retreated. Doss looked at the wounded men, looked at the cliff edge, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He prayed, "Lord, please help me get one more." Then he crawled toward the nearest wounded soldier. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919 in Lynchburg, Virginia. He was the second of 3 children. His father, William Thomas Doss, was a carpenter and a World War I veteran who had been gassed and suffered from lung problems for the rest of his life. His mother, Bertha Edward Doss, was a devout Seventh-day Adventist who raised her children strictly according to church doctrine. The Seventh-day Adventist Church observed the Sabbath from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. Members were forbidden to work, cook, or engage in secular activities during that time. The church taught nonviolence based on the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Church members were encouraged to serve in the military as non-combatants, medics, or support personnel, but were not to bear arms. Doss absorbed these teachings completely. His religious convictions were formed by his mother's instruction, reinforced by personal experience when he was 7 years old. In 1926, his father got into a drunken argument with his uncle. The argument escalated into a fist fight. William Doss retrieved a pistol and pointed it at his brother. Desmond's mother grabbed the gun from her husband. She handed the weapon to young Desmond and told him to run to the police station and give it to officers there so his father couldn't retrieve it. Desmond ran a mile holding the pistol, terrified. He gave it to police. His uncle pressed charges. His father was arrested. The charges were eventually dropped, but the incident traumatized Desmond. He never forgot holding that gun, knowing his father might use it to kill someone. From that day, he believed weapons were instruments of death that Christians should never touch. Through the 1930s, Doss worked as a carpenter like his father. He was quiet, devout, physically small, but wiry and strong from construction work. On March 17, 1942, 10 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Doss received his draft notice. He reported for induction on April 1, 1942. At the induction center, Doss told the examining officer he was a conscientious objector. The officer asked if he refused to serve. Doss said, no. He would serve. He just wouldn't carry a weapon or kill anyone. The officer explained that conscientious objectors could request non-combatant status and serve as medics. Doss said that was acceptable. He was classified 1AO, available for non-combatant military service. The classification should have assigned him to the Medical Corps immediately. Instead, the Army sent him to infantry basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The error was bureaucratic, probably a clerk entering the wrong code. But it meant Doss arrived at an infantry training company in April 1942 as a private who refused to touch a rifle. His reception was predictable. The drill sergeants called him a coward. The other recruits mocked him. When the company drew rifles from the armory, Doss refused to accept one. The supply sergeant reported him. The company commander, Captain Jack Glover, summoned Doss to his office and asked if he was refusing orders. Doss explained he was classified 1AO, non-combatant, and was not required to carry weapons. Glover checked Doss's records, confirmed the classification, and told him he would still train with the infantry, but would serve as a medic. Glover was skeptical. He told Doss that medics in combat had one of the most dangerous jobs in the Army. They ran toward gunfire, not away from it. If Doss was using religion as an excuse to avoid combat, he would be exposed quickly. Doss said his religion forbade killing, not dying. He had no intention of avoiding combat. Through basic training, Doss's fellow soldiers made his life miserable. They called him coward yellowbelly and conscientious objector, spitting the last term like an insult. They stole his Bible. They threw boots at him while he prayed. They beat him up in the barracks when no officers were present. Doss reported none of it. When officers asked about his black eyes and bruises, he said he'd fallen or walked into a door. The harassment intensified when Doss refused to train on Saturdays. Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath ran from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. Doss would not drill march or do physical training during those hours. He attended religious services instead when he could find them, or read his Bible if services were unavailable. His company commander tried to force him to train on Saturdays. Doss refused. The commander threatened court-martial. Doss said he would accept court-martial rather than violate his religious convictions. The matter went up the chain of command to the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Uri. Uri reviewed Doss's records, consulted with the judge advocate, and ruled that Doss's 1AO classification exempted him from Saturday training as a religious accommodation. Glover was ordered to excuse Doss from Saturday activities. This ruling made Doss even more unpopular. Other soldiers had to train 7 days a week. Doss got Saturdays off because of his religion. They saw it as special treatment. The beatings continued. Doss endured them. In June 1942, Doss completed basic training. He was assigned to the 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division as a company medic. The 77th Division was a New York National Guard division that had been federalized and filled with draftees from across the country. The division trained at Fort Jackson through 1942 and early 1943, preparing for deployment overseas. During training, Doss proved he was physically capable. He could march 25 miles with a full pack. He could climb rope obstacles, crawl under barbed wire, and complete infiltration courses under live machine gun fire. He excelled at first aid training, learning to treat gunshot wounds, burns, fractures, and shock under simulated combat conditions. His instructors noted he was calm under pressure, methodical, and seemed genuinely committed to saving lives. But his refusal to carry a weapon remained a problem. In combat, medics were supposed to carry a pistol for self-defense. Doss refused. He would not carry any weapon, not a pistol, not a knife, not even brass knuckles. His only equipment would be his medical kit. His company commander, Captain Glover, tried again to have Doss transferred out of the infantry. Glover argued that Doss would be a liability in combat, unable to defend himself or his patients. The request was denied. Doss's 1AO classification meant he was legally entitled to serve as a non-combatant medic. He could not be removed from the unit because of his religious convictions. The 77th Division deployed to the Pacific in March 1944. They arrived in Hawaii for final training, then deployed to Guam in July 1944 for their first combat operation. Guam had been captured by Japan in December 1941. American forces were retaking it as part of the Mariana Islands campaign. The 77th Division landed on July 23, 1944, and fought for 20 days to secure the island. Doss went into combat for the first time on July 24th. His company assaulted a Japanese-held ridge. Machine gun fire raked the assault line. Men fell wounded. Doss ran forward under fire, reached the wounded, applied bandages and tourniquets, and dragged them to cover. He treated 15 wounded men that day. Several soldiers who had beaten him during training later said Doss saved their lives on Guam. One soldier who had called Doss a coward and thrown boots at him during basic training was shot through both legs. Doss crawled to him under machine gun fire, applied tourniquets, and dragged him 50 yards to safety. The soldier later apologized for everything he'd said and done during training. By the end of the Guam campaign, Doss's company had changed their opinion of him. He was not a coward. He was the medic who ran toward gunfire when everyone else was trying to find cover. He treated wounded men under conditions that made other medics hesitate. He refused to leave casualties behind. He was small, unarmed, and absolutely fearless. The 77th Division's next operation was Leyte in the Philippines, October 1944. The division fought through jungles and mountains for 3 months, suffering heavy casualties from Japanese resistance and tropical diseases. Doss treated hundreds of wounded men during the Leyte campaign. He contracted dengue fever in December 1944, but refused evacuation. He treated wounded soldiers while running a 103-degree fever. His company commander finally ordered him evacuated when he collapsed from dehydration. He spent 2 weeks in a field hospital, then returned to his unit. In March 1945, the 77th Division was assigned to Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa. Okinawa was the last major island before Japan's home islands. It was defended by 77,000 Japanese troops who had fortified the island with caves, tunnels, bunkers, and artillery positions. The invasion began on April 1, 1945. The 77th Division landed on April 16 and was immediately committed to the assault on the Maeda Escarpment, a massive limestone ridge that dominated the southern approaches to the Japanese defensive lines. The escarpment was 400 feet high, nearly vertical on the north face, with caves and tunnels throughout. Japanese defenders had fortified every cave entrance with machine guns and mortars. Approaching the escarpment meant crossing 200 yards of open ground swept by interlocking fields of fire. Climbing it meant ascending cargo nets, while Japanese soldiers threw grenades and fired from above. Taking the summit meant clearing caves and spider holes while under constant mortar bombardment. B Company 1st Battalion 307th Infantry assaulted Hacksaw Ridge on May 2, 1945. They were repulsed with heavy casualties. They attacked again on May 3rd, repulsed again. On May 4th, they finally took the summit after a 4-hour battle. They held it overnight, then were driven back by a Japanese counterattack on the morning of May 5th. The Americans retook the summit at 1300 hours on May 5 after artillery preparation and a coordinated assault. The fighting was savage. Japanese soldiers fought from caves and spider holes, appearing suddenly, firing, then disappearing underground. American soldiers used flamethrowers to clear caves, threw grenades into holes, and fought hand-to-hand with bayonets and entrenching tools. By 1530 hours, Japanese resistance on the summit had been suppressed. B Company held the ridge. They had suffered 35% casualties taking it. Wounded men were scattered across the summit. Medics were treating them, preparing for evacuation. The plan was to bring stretcher bearers up the cargo nets to carry wounded down, but at 1630 hours, Japanese mortars began falling on the summit. The barrage was heavy and accurate. Shells landed every 15 to 30 seconds. The Japanese had pre-registered their mortar fire on the summit, knowing they would counterattack to retake it. The mortar barrage was preparation for that counterattack. Captain Glover ordered B Company to retreat. The ridge could not be held under that mortar fire. The company would withdraw, evacuate their wounded, and assault the ridge again tomorrow with fresh troops. The order was tactically sound but created an immediate problem. There were approximately 75 wounded men on the summit, some ambulatory, most not. The only way down was cargo nets thrown over the cliff face. Wounded men could not climb down cargo nets without help. Able-bodied soldiers could not carry wounded men down cargo nets while under mortar fire. The casualties would have to be left behind temporarily. Once the mortar barrage lifted, stretcher bearers would come back up to evacuate them. This was a lie, and everyone knew it. The mortar barrage was not going to lift. It was covering a Japanese counterattack. Once B Company retreated down the cliff, Japanese soldiers would retake the summit and kill every wounded American they found. Standard procedure would be for medics to stay with the wounded during the retreat, providing treatment until stretcher bearers could return. But no medic was going to stay on that ridge under mortar fire, knowing that Japanese infantry was coming. Every medic in B Company climbed down the cargo nets with the able-bodied soldiers, except Desmond Doss. Doss watched the company retreat. He looked at the wounded men scattered across the summit. He knew what would happen to them if he left. He made his decision in seconds. He was not going down that cliff. His company commander ordered him to retreat. Doss refused. Glover told him that was insubordination. Doss said he understood but was not leaving the wounded. Glover did not have time to argue. Mortar shells were landing continuously. The company had to get off the ridge immediately. Glover told Doss he was on his own, then climbed down the cargo nets with the last of his men. At 17:30 hours, Doss was alone on the summit of Hacksaw Ridge with approximately 75 wounded men and an unknown number of Japanese soldiers in caves 50 yards away. The mortar barrage continued. Doss crouched behind a shattered tree stump and prayed. He prayed for strength, for courage, for God to help him save these men. Then he crawled toward the nearest wounded soldier. The soldier had been hit by shrapnel in both legs and could not walk. Doss bandaged the wounds, applied tourniquets, and told the soldier he was going to lower him down the cliff. The soldier asked how. Doss explained he would drag him to the cliff edge, tie a rope around him, and lower him down. The soldier weighed 180 pounds. Doss weighed 145 pounds. The cliff was 400 feet high. The soldier said it was impossible. Doss said they were going to try. Doss had acquired rope earlier in the day specifically for casualty evacuation. He had coiled 100 feet of rope and left it near the cliff edge. He dragged the wounded soldier 40 yards across open ground to the cliff edge. Mortar shells continued falling. Machine gun fire swept the ridge from Japanese positions. Doss ignored it. He tied the rope around the soldier's chest and under his armpits in a bowline knot. He wrapped the rope around a tree stump for leverage. Then he began lowering the soldier down the cliff. The technique was crude. Doss let the rope slide through his hands using friction and the tree stump to control descent. His hands burned from rope friction. The soldier banged against the cliff face multiple times during descent. Doss lowered him 50 feet to a ledge where stretcher bearers from below could reach him. The entire process took 15 minutes. One casualty evacuated. Approximately 74 remaining. Doss prayed again. "Lord, please help me get one more." He crawled back across the summit toward the next wounded soldier. This soldier had been shot through the abdomen. He was conscious but in shock. Doss gave him morphine, bandaged the wound, and began dragging him toward the cliff. A mortar shell landed 20 feet away. Shrapnel hit Doss in the left leg. He ignored it, continued dragging the casualty. He reached the cliff edge, tied the rope, lowered the soldier. "Lord, please help me get one more." For 12 hours, from 17:30 hours on May 5th to 05:30 hours on May 6th, Doss crawled across Hacksaw Ridge under continuous mortar and machine gun fire, finding wounded soldiers, treating them, and lowering them down the cliff. He worked methodically, never running, never panicking. Each time he lowered a casualty, he prayed the same prayer, "Lord, please help me get one more." The prayer became a mantra that kept him focused. He was not trying to save 75 men. He was trying to save one man. Then another. Then another. Each casualty was a separate mission. Complete one mission, start the next. Don't think about how many remain. Just get one more. The physical toll was extraordinary. Doss dragged wounded men weighing 150 to 200 pounds across 40 to 60 yards of rough ground to the cliff edge. He lifted them into position for lowering. He controlled their descent by hand rope burning through his palms despite wrapping cloth around his hands. He climbed back across the ridge to find the next casualty. He did this 75 times. The total distance he covered was over 4 miles of crawling and dragging under fire. His hands bled. His leg wound from shrapnel bled continuously. His knees were shredded from crawling over limestone rocks. He vomited from exhaustion and dehydration. He continued. The psychological toll was worse. Doss knew Japanese soldiers were in caves 50 yards away. He expected at any moment to be shot or to have a Japanese soldier appear from a spider hole and kill him with a bayonet. He had no weapon. If he encountered a Japanese soldier, he would die. He prayed constantly while working, asking God to make him invisible to the enemy, to let him complete his mission. Several times during the night, he heard Japanese voices close by. He froze, waited for them to pass, then continued working. He later said he believed God made him invisible that night. The Japanese knew wounded Americans were on the summit. They could hear men moaning, but they never found Doss. By 300 hours on May 6th, Doss had lowered approximately 50 men. He was hallucinating from exhaustion. He saw his mother standing near the cliff edge telling him to rest. He saw his wife Dorothy, who he had married in 1942, asking him to come home. He ignored the hallucinations and continued working. At 0430 hours, as dawn approached, Doss found a soldier who had been shot through the chest. The soldier was unconscious, breathing shallowly. Doss could feel a sucking chest wound where air was entering the chest cavity. Without immediate treatment, the soldier would die from collapsed lung. Doss had exhausted his medical supplies hours ago. He improvised a chest seal using a cellophane wrapper from a cigarette pack, taping it over the wound to prevent air from entering. He dragged the soldier to the cliff edge and lowered him. The technique worked. The soldier survived. At 0530 hours, as the sun rose, Doss lowered the last casualty. He had evacuated 75 men. The exact number is disputed. Doss later said he thought it was 50. Captain Glover's after-action report stated it was more than 75. They compromised on 75 for the Medal of Honor citation. Doss collapsed near the cliff edge. He could not stand. His legs would not support his weight. His hands were bleeding, the skin on his palms completely worn through in places. His leg wound had been bleeding for 12 hours and he had lost significant blood. He was severely dehydrated. He vomited bile, having nothing left in his stomach. American soldiers climbed back up the cargo nets at 0600 hours. B Company was returning to retake the summit now that daylight allowed artillery and air support. They found Doss lying near the cliff edge, barely conscious. They carried him down the cargo nets and evacuated him to a field hospital. Doctors treated his shrapnel wound, his rope burns, his dehydration. They told him he had lowered 75 men, weighing an average of 170 pounds, down a 50-foot cliff 75 times. The total weight he had lowered was over 6 tons. They asked how he did it. Doss said God helped him. While Doss was in the hospital, recovering B Company fought for another week to permanently secure Hacksaw Ridge. They took the summit on May 6th, lost it to a counterattack on May 7th, and finally secured it on May 10th. The battle cost B Company 52 men killed and 174 wounded. Doss returned to duty on May 17th. He participated in operations on southern Okinawa through May 21st. On May 21st, during a firefight near Shuri Castle, Doss was treating a wounded soldier when an artillery shell exploded nearby. Shrapnel hit Doss in both legs and left arm. His left leg was broken by a large fragment. He applied a tourniquet to his leg using a rifle stock as a lever, the first and only time during the war he touched a weapon. Other medics carried him to an aid station. While being carried on a stretcher toward the aid station, the stretcher bearers came under machine gun fire. They dropped the stretcher and took cover. Doss rolled off the stretcher, crawled to another wounded soldier, treated him, and waited for stretcher bearers to return. When bearers returned and picked up his stretcher, Doss saw another soldier had been wounded. Doss told the bearers to take that soldier first. They refused, saying Doss was more seriously wounded. Doss insisted. The bearers put Doss's stretcher down and carried the other soldier. While lying on the ground waiting, Doss was hit by a Japanese sniper. The bullet shattered his left arm. Doss tied a rifle stock to his arm as a splint and waited 4 more hours before stretcher bearers returned. He was finally evacuated to a field hospital on May 21, 1945. His combat service was over. Doctors at the hospital removed 17 pieces of shrapnel from Doss's body. His left arm required multiple surgeries. His left leg was set with pins and would remain stiff for the rest of his life. While Doss was recovering, his company commander, Captain Glover, wrote him up for the Medal of Honor. The citation detailed Doss's actions on Hacksaw Ridge on May 5th, plus subsequent actions treating wounded soldiers under fire. The recommendation went up the chain of command through Battalion, Regiment, Division, Corps, and Army headquarters. Each level endorsed it. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, commanding 10th Army, personally approved the recommendation and forwarded it to the War Department. On October 12, 1945, President Harry Truman presented Desmond Doss with the Medal of Honor at the White House. Doss was the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. The citation read in part, "Private First Class Doss was a company aidman when the 1st Battalion assaulted a jagged escarpment 400 feet high. As our troops gained the summit, a heavy concentration of artillery, mortar, and machine gun fire crashed into them, inflicting approximately 75 casualties and driving the others back. Private First Class Doss refused to seek cover and remained in the fire-swept area with the many stricken, carrying them one by one to the edge of the escarpment and there lowering them on a rope-supported litter down the face of a cliff to friendly hands. The citation continued for another 200 words, describing additional acts of heroism. Truman read the entire citation, then placed the medal around Doss's neck. Truman shook his hand and said, "I consider this a greater honor than being president." Doss returned to Virginia after the war. He married Dorothy Shuta, who had waited for him throughout the war. They had one son, Desmond Jr., born in 1946. Doss's combat injuries never fully healed. His left arm remained partially paralyzed. His left leg caused chronic pain. In 1946, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, likely contracted in the Philippines. He spent 5 years in veterans' hospitals undergoing treatment. The treatment included removing 5 ribs and 1 lung. He was left deaf in 1 ear from antibiotic side effects. Despite his injuries, Doss never complained. He worked as a carpenter when his health allowed. He volunteered with his church. He spoke occasionally about his wartime service when asked, but generally preferred not to discuss it. He said he had done his duty and did not consider himself a hero. The other men who died on Okinawa were the heroes. He had just tried to save as many as he could. In 1991, Doss's wife Dorothy died from a car accident. Doss was devastated. They had been married 49 years. He lived alone for several years, then married Frances Dumont in 1993. He remained active in his church and in veterans organizations. He attended Medal of Honor Society conventions and maintained contact with other recipients. In 2004, Doss's story was featured in a book, The Unlikeliest Hero by Booten Herndon. The book renewed interest in his wartime service. In 2016, director Mel Gibson released a film about Doss, Hacksaw Ridge, starring Andrew Garfield. The film was critically acclaimed and financially successful. It introduced Doss's story to millions of people who had never heard of him. Doss saw early footage from the film before it was released. He told the filmmakers the movie was too violent. He said combat was worse than what they showed, but he didn't think audiences needed to see that level of violence. He said the important message was that you could serve your country and your faith simultaneously, that religious conviction and military service were not incompatible. Desmond Doss died on March 23, 2006, at his home in Piedmont, Alabama. He was 87 years old. He was buried at Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee with full military honors. His funeral was attended by over 1,000 people, including Medal of Honor recipients, veterans from the 77th Division, and representatives from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The eulogies emphasized that Doss had lived his faith, that he had proven faith required action, not just belief. At the funeral, several men spoke who Doss had saved on Hacksaw Ridge. One man, now in his 80s, said he had been shot through both legs on May 5, 1945, and was certain he would die on that ridge. Then a small unarmed medic appeared, bandaged his wounds, dragged him to the cliff edge, and lowered him to safety. The man said he owed his entire life, his children, his grandchildren, everything to Desmond Doss. He had carried that debt for 61 years and could never repay it. The lesson of Desmond Doss's actions on Hacksaw Ridge is that moral conviction, when genuinely held, creates extraordinary courage. Doss refused to carry a weapon not because he was afraid to fight, but because he believed God commanded him not to kill. That conviction was absolute. It survived mockery, beatings, threats of court-martial, and 2 years of harassment from his own unit. When the test came on May 5, 1945, when every other able-bodied soldier retreated and abandoned the wounded, Doss's faith gave him the strength to stay. He was not fearless, he was terrified, but his fear of disobeying God was greater than his fear of dying. He believed God would protect him if he did his duty. He prayed, "Lord, please help me get one more," 75 times, because he believed God was listening. Whether that belief was objectively true is unknowable. What is certain is that the belief gave Doss the psychological strength to function for 12 hours under conditions that would have broken most men. The physical achievement was extraordinary. Lowering 6 tons of casualties down a cliff by hand while wounded, exhausted, and dehydrated is beyond what normal human physiology should allow. Doss succeeded because he never thought about lowering 75 men. He thought about lowering one man, then another, then another. He broke the impossible task into 75 possible tasks and completed them sequentially. The spiritual achievement was even more remarkable. Doss maintained absolute faith under the worst possible circumstances. He could have rationalized leaving. Every other soldier left. His commander ordered him to leave. Staying was tactically insane. But Doss's faith told him that leaving wounded men to die was wrong. His faith was not abstract theology discussed in church on Sundays. It was concrete moral direction that told him exactly what to do at the moment of decision. Stay. Save them. God will help. The faith was right. Doss saved 75 men and survived. The Medal of Honor citation calls his actions gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. That is accurate but incomplete. Doss's actions were not just courageous. They were an expression of faith so complete that fear became irrelevant. He did not conquer his fear. He simply obeyed what he believed God commanded. The courage was a byproduct of obedience. The men who mocked Doss during training, who beat him and called him a coward, learned something important on Hacksaw Ridge. Refusing to kill does not mean refusing to serve. Doss served more effectively than soldiers who carried weapons because he was willing to die for others without being willing to kill for any reason. The contradiction made him rare, perhaps unique. Most soldiers understand fighting for comrades, killing to protect the people beside you. Doss fought for comrades without killing anyone. He protected his unit not with firepower but with medical skill and courage. He ran toward gunfire unarmed, dragged wounded men to safety under fire, and survived situations that should have killed him a dozen times. The soldiers who served with Doss came to understand that faith, when genuinely held, can be the strongest weapon of all. Doss carried no rifle, but he carried absolute moral conviction. That conviction made him stand on a ridge where everyone else retreated. That conviction made him lower 75 men down a cliff while wounded and exhausted. That conviction made him ignore pain, fear, and death. Desmond Doss proved that you can serve God and country simultaneously, that religious faith and military service are compatible, that conscientious objection to killing does not equal cowardice. He proved it by saving 75 men in 12 hours on a ridge in Okinawa where he should have died. He lowered them one at a time, praying after each one, "Lord, please help me get one more." God helped him 75 times.